All right. Well, thank you everybody for being here. Also, thank you to our guests who are here. I'm Justin Hopper. I'm the chief for CDFA's Office of Civil Rights, and I'm also the chair for the department's Disability Advisory Committee. And then we are very happy to welcome Stop Stigma Sacramento here for Mental Health Awareness Month. And we have a few speakers, but I'm going to turn it over to Amelia from Stop Stigma. And Amelia, it's all yours.
All right. Thank you so much for being here. I apologize for being off camera. I am sick, which is a major bummer because I love this weather, so I wish I was outside. But I'm here, and I'm really excited to be doing this. I think it's become kind of an annual thing, which is really awesome. If you weren't aware already, May is Mental Health Awareness Month. So Stop Stigma is in high demand, and we are out there doing stigma reduction in the community, spreading the message that mental illness, it's not always what you think. So I am, like I said, I'm Amelia Baines. I am the health educator with the project. I'm part of a dynamic duo. Marielle, our senior mental health counselor, is actually doing another event at this time, so we are booked and busy. But we are here from Stop Stigma Sacramento. So the focus of today's meeting or today's presentation is we're going to be giving you a brief overview of what the project is, what Stop Stigma is all about. And then the more interesting part, in my opinion, is that you're going to be hearing from speakers who are going to share their lived experience on what it's like to live with a mental illness and hopefully combat some of those misconceptions that we have about what someone with a mental illness looks like and acts like and goes about their daily lives. So, Stop Stigma Sacramento is a part of a greater project known as Mental Illness It's Not Always What You Think. And this is a program out of Sacramento County. And our program specifically is a joint effort between behavioral health and public health. And we do a really unique thing. We go out in the community and we educate people. Stop Stigma doesn't provide any direct services. It's all about reducing the stigma surrounding mental illness. So our project seeks to reduce stigma and discrimination, promote mental health and wellness, and mostly inspire hope for people and families living with a mental illness. Of course, obligatory funding slide. So we're funded by Proposition 63, which is the Mental Health Services Act. And this places a 1% tax on people who earn more than $1 million a year. Unfortunately, that is not me, but thank you to those people. And since 2005, it's brought over $12 billion statewide for services, treatments, and programs. And our program is specifically funded by the prevention and early intervention component. Because, like I mentioned, we don't offer direct services, but we are out there in the community educating and doing outreach. All right, we're going to set the stage here a little bit. We're going to talk about mental illness. We're going to talk about some statistics. So, 1 in 5 adults are living with a mental illness, and 1 in 6 youth will experience a mental health challenge in their lifetime. So, in Sacramento County, that's actually over 350,000 people living with a mental illness. So, one thing we notice when we go out in the community is mental illness, people tend to think it's not as prevalent. People tend to think, oh, it's part of someone else's family, maybe not my family. I can guarantee you, people living with mental illnesses are your coworkers, your family members, your neighbors, your teachers, etc. 50% of mental illness symptoms start by the time someone is 14 and 75% by the time someone is 24. And this is why our program spends a lot of time in schools. We want people to recognize that mental illness is not something that people typically experience later in their life. It's when we're teenagers, it's when our brain's developing and we're figuring our life out. That's when most mental illness symptoms start. And this statistic always blows my mind. Most people live with symptoms for 10 years before getting help. So if you go outside and break your arm, no one in their right mind would wait 10 years before receiving help. But because of the stigma and shame surrounding mental illness, we tend to second guess ourselves. We tend to doubt ourselves. We tend to delay seeking help because we're worried about what other people might think. And that leads people to live with mental illness untreated for a very long time statistically. And 2 out of those 3 people will not even ever reach out and get the help that they need. And this is largely due to stigma. So we're here to change that. We're here to talk about mental health in a positive, approachable way. You're going to hear from a couple of our amazing speakers who live with a mental illness every day, and how they take care of themselves and how they thrive and their recommendations for you, if you notice any similarities in their stories. All right. And it's important to point out mental illness touches every single demographic across the board. It doesn't care what tax bracket you're in. It doesn't care how many properties you own or how happy your life otherwise may seem. Mental illness affects everyone. It does not discriminate. And it's okay to ask for help. All right, what is stigma? We hear this word get thrown around a lot. It's in the name of our project, and I found that out in my education journey, not everyone knows what stigma means. So, stigma is the mark of disgrace or negative attitudes against someone based on a characteristic like mental illness, health condition, race, gender, sexuality, disability, religion, and culture. It's that shame, it's that judgment, it's that stereotypes that surround something. And sometimes we're very conscious of it. Sometimes we know, you know what, I feel this way towards a certain group because of X, Y, and Z. And sometimes it's even beyond our conscious mind. Sometimes it's deeply, deeply ingrained in our society, and we might say things or think things that are stigmatizing. One can also have self-stigma or internalized stigma, which leads to shame about having a mental illness. So this can lead to ignoring a mental illness or dismissing it is also part of the stigma. So we challenge stigma by getting educated about mental illness, realizing how common it is, that it can affect everyone, and combating those myths and lies, and also getting the help you need for yourself or encouraging others to get help. All right. So for those of us who have lived experiences related to these topics, we know that even talking about them can be a difficult thing to do. I want to encourage you to take care of yourself. I know we're in a lunch and learn. Everyone's cameras are off because we're probably eating lunch. But if you need to take a step away because this is a heavy topic, please take care of yourselves. Our speakers are always encouraged to take care of themselves, but as our audience, we want to watch out for you as well. All right, so that brings me to our Stop Stigma Sacramento Speakers Bureau. This is the core of what we do, and it is such an amazing project. So Stop Stigma Sacramento has trained over 250 Sacramento County residents who live with a mental illness to go out in the community and share their stories. It's incredibly empowering to hear what mental illness is like from someone who actually lives in it and from day to day. It is the most authentic way to present this topic. So we're going to hear from 4 speakers today. We've got a packed agenda for you, so we're going to keep going. All of these speakers have incredibly different backgrounds, different stories, different experiences, different advice, but they all are connected with lived experience with mental illness. So we're going to hear from 4 speakers today, and then we're going to go ahead and take questions at the very end, and you can ask them questions about their stories, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. All right. And we are going to go ahead and hear from our first speaker that hopped on, and that is going to be Kim.
Hi there. Can you see okay?
Yep, we can see you.
Okay. I didn't know that I was going first, but that's okay. So I always like doing DAC meetings because I did work for the state. I worked for EDD, and I was on the DAC committee, and I was actually the first person on the committee with mental illness as my disability. So I have a good place in my heart for DAC. And I'm just going to go ahead and start with my story. And it's called On My Way. November 25th. That was the date I wrote on my calendar and even used as my password at work, my date of death. I figured it would be the best time after my daughter's 7th birthday and Thanksgiving, but before Christmas. I didn't want to ruin those days for my family, and so I picked a day in between. It made sense to me at the time. But the funny thing is that I didn't really know where it was coming from. I was happily married with a young family. My daughter was 6 and my son was 5. I was going to work and functioning like normal, doing my job and spending my lunch breaks with my friends. I was the assistant leader of my daughter's Girl Scout troop and taking time to attend preschool field trips with my son. It all seemed to be going along like it was supposed to. I was working and my kids were growing and healthy, but something was not right. I was using my impending date of death as my password. Who does that? When I casually mentioned this idea to my therapist, she tried to understand, but the look on her face told me that what I was saying so nonchalantly was really a big deal. So, with my permission, she called my husband, and together we decided that I would voluntarily check myself into a psych hospital. It was the first of about 20 times I've been behind those locked doors. Looking back on that day, the signs were pretty clear that I needed help, and I needed it in a big way. Although I was holding it all together and presenting a good front, the cracks were there. My husband had recently lost his job, and I was in a constant panic over money. I wasn't sleeping, so I was also tired, always tired. And I was having painful flashbacks of the sexual abuse I had suffered as a 6-year-old. In order to find relief from all that stress, I started cutting on my arm, something I had never done in my entire life. Not only did the cutting bring me relief and distraction, but it also helped me to simply feel. Otherwise, I was numb. I remember looking at pictures of family and friends and thinking, I know that I love them, and I know that they love me, but I couldn't feel it. I would hear laughter in my office, but I couldn't join in. Instead, I would go to my car on my brakes and cut and feel. Being admitted to the hospital was surreal. They searched my bags for sharp items and took out the strings from my sweatshirts. It wasn't a strip search, but they checked my body too. And I saw the other patients. And to my surprise, many of them looked a lot like me. I had expected to walk into a scene from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, but instead, I entered into a place of healing, a place to stabilize, a place to be safe from myself. I met my psychiatrist the next day. He was a kind man, someone I felt instantly safe with, and he asked me why I was there. I had to go back in time as I told him my history. My parents divorced when I was 6 and the abuse that was happening at the same time. I told him about growing up without my dad, and I told him what had happened to me 13 years prior. I was a Peace Corps volunteer living in Guatemala. I was about halfway through my 2 years of service, and I developed a deep love of the country and my service there. I also cared deeply about a family I shared an apartment complex with, a single mom with 2 young boys. I'd gone out of town one weekend to come home to having had my apartment broken into. It was obviously kids, curious kids. I mean, who else would have spread my tooth floss across the room? So I told the mom, Carolina, what had happened. Looking back on what resulted from my telling her, I would never have said a word. From my tiny kitchen, she summoned the boys upstairs. She told them to remove their belts, and before my eyes, before I could react, she whipped them. They held out their hands so she could whip those too. She asked for salt and rubbed it into their wounds. I stood there, and as I did, I felt as if my skin was peeling away from my body, from the top of my head down. I was now a raw nerve, unable to stop the abuse I now felt responsible for. After that night, I was afraid of Carolina. I could hear her beating her boys on a regular basis. They would often stand outside my door, crying, wanting to come in, to escape. But I never let them in because I, too, was afraid of their mom. There was no CPS to call, no one to help me help this family. And I started using earplugs and high doses of Benadryl PM to block out the noise. And in the end, I left Guatemala in my 2 years of Peace Corps service with a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder and in a severe depression. 5 days after returning home, I met my future husband, and as life does, mine moved along. I got married, had 2 kids in 2 years, and kind of pushed that trauma to the back of my mind. I was still haunted by it, the images, the screaming, the crying, but I pushed it down, along with the memories of my own childhood abuse. But these things can only be pushed down for so long. And that day in November was a harsh reminder of that. The combination of having a full-time job, 2 young kids, my husband out of work, and those relentless flashbacks of abuse intruding uncontrollably through my mind, and the scene was set. The perfect storm. The depression, the numbness, the cutting, and that date in November. And so I found myself sitting there with this nice doctor explaining why I was in the psych hospital. That first time in set me on my way to recovery. I say on my way because it's not complete. I'm not sure that it ever will be. That's the thing with mental illness. You start to feel better, you may feel in control, but so often it creeps back in. Sometimes I can't resist the urge to cut. Sometimes I need to talk to my therapist every day instead of just once a week. And sometimes I need to go back behind those locked doors. But it's okay because I'm now living with and no longer dying from mental illness. I'm still here today, not just because I've been in a psych hospital a bunch of times. I'm still here today because as I've gone through this journey, I've had an amazing support around me. My husband has stood by my side and took care of our kids when I couldn't. My boss at the time was open to learning from me, hearing my story, and never wavered in her support of me and my abilities. My friends came to the hospital, sat with me while I stared silently into space with tears running down my face. And my doctors walked patiently through this patiently walked this road with me, feeling my pain, taking my calls after hours, and holding out hope for my future when I couldn't see beyond the next moment. We all need support. We all need advocates. Envelop yourself with people who care. Be that person for a friend or family member who may need you in a crisis. Because as someone who's been there, I know how crucial we are to each other. And thanks to all who stood by me, today I can say, in this moment, I have depression and PTSD. But right now, at least in this moment, they do not have me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kim. Like I mentioned before, we're going to go ahead and hold questions until the very end. And so we're going to move on to our next speaker, Bill.
Hello, hello. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for having me. My name is Bill Marr. I live here in Folsom. A little bit about me. I am married. I've got 3 kiddos. I own an insurance business. I coach high school baseball. I used to be a police officer for about 7 years in the Bay Area. And I have a really severe anxiety disorder. It's called OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. So a lot of people believe that, oh, you'll hear the term everybody's a little OCD because maybe they want to, tidy things up a certain way, or maybe when they travel, they got to like put, the soap in the washroom a certain way, or they like to make their bed a certain way and they're kind of tidy and they like things really neat and stuff. And the term everybody's a little OCD, I guess some people would be offended by it. I don't get offended by that, but you know that it's a problem when it affects your day-to-day life and it interferes with your ability to just go about your normal day. So I'd really like to try and explain what it is and how it affects me and how I've sort of overcome it. And I manage it really, really well. So obsession is fear. So when somebody has an obsession, it is an irrational fear of something. And compulsion is a behavior that you practice as a result of that fear. Now, that behavior can be something like checking the door 100 times, checking the stove 25 times, or maybe it's a little bit also more ritualistic where you have to brush your teeth with 3 different toothbrushes in 3 different bathrooms, and you got to wash your hands in 3 different sinks. For me, it's the same, but my obsession or fear is that I'm worried about having a heart attack and dying. That's really what it boils down to. Anything health related, if I eat too much food and I get a pain in my side, I mean, I literally ate lunch, let's say I ate lunch 20 minutes ago and I ate too much and I have this pain in my side. Normally people would go, oh man, I shouldn't eat all those fries. I immediately go to, oh my gosh, I have a tumor. And so if it's too hot outside, I am already thinking about heat stroke. And so as a result of anything that could negatively impact my health, and trust me, inside your mind, you can take the tip of a pen and turn it into Mount Shasta in about 2 minutes flat. So anything at all that I could relate to affecting me negatively, because OCD is called the doubter's disease, right? So again, obsession is fear, compulsion is behavior. So as a result of me being worried about having a heart attack and dying, I want to know where all the hospitals are. So my compulsions or compulsion, the most common one is to go to the hospital. So again, I live in Folsom. I'm a dad, I'm a brother, I'm a husband, been married, 23 years, and I live a very wonderful life. But I have been to the hospital in Folsom since July of 2008 when it hit me about 350 to 400 times, give or take. That's not normal. I wouldn't call that, oh, Bill's a little OCD. No, Bill's constantly trying to manage his fear of having a heart attack and dying. And at this point, it's pretty much for any reason, right? So again, if I play softball on Wednesday nights at 7 and it's during the summer and it's super hot, I have 4 million gallons of water with me. And I know exactly how far it is to either walk, drive to the nearest hospital. So when I've been to the hospital that many times, I don't go to the ER and walk in and say, hey, I've been having a panic attack. I basically, of all the times that I've been there, I've probably only gone in a half dozen times. The rest of the time, I just go to the parking lot, sit there until I feel better. Now, technically, that's a compulsion and I shouldn't do it. But when I go to the hospital and I don't go inside, I chalk it up as a win because I didn't go in. And that's a big deal for me. When I drive to LA, I don't drive Highway 5, I drive Highway 99. Why? Because there's more hospitals, right? And so I do little things like that. So um, when I go to a client meeting, so I manage group health insurance for companies. So I have to meet with their CFO, their HR manager, their CEO, whoever it is. And when I go to those meetings, it's all I can do not to leave the meeting within the first few minutes. The last big meeting I went to was a company that I ended up getting the benefits for. They had about 250 employees, maybe a little bit more. The first 3 or 4 minutes of that meeting, I couldn't feel my feet. Like I didn't know how I got into the door and got to the meeting room because I was so anxious. Why was I anxious? Well, because I was worried that if I get up in the middle of that meeting because I'm having anxiety or a panic attack, they're going to, okay, well, you're a loser for one. Two, you're weak. Three, why would we hire you as our broker if you can't even meet with us without freaking out? And so all these things are going on in your head, which is just fueling what I call the doubt bully. So the doubt bully's constantly pushing me around and saying, what if this happens? What if that happens? One more little example. Somebody says, hey, Bill, let's go camping. I want to go camping, except I don't want to be in the middle of the woods where there's no hospital. And people go, oh, well, it's okay. If something happens, we'll just call Life Flight. They'll Life Flight you out of there. No, you don't understand. Just the weeks before the camping trip, my doubt bully is in my head. Are you really going to go? Now, once the anxiety hit me, I decided to go to the Anxiety Treatment Center of Sacramento, which is here locally. A young lady named Robin Zasio owns it. And when I went there, they taught me about exposure response prevention, cognitive behavioral therapy. So essentially what they're doing is they're exposing you to your fear slowly but surely, and then teaching you that when you get to that fight or flight response, and every fiber of my being is telling me, run to the hospital, get there as quick as humanly possible, you have to learn to sit there with that and be okay with it. Because what people don't understand until you go through treatment is your body is physically incapable of staying at that adrenaline-filled state of fight or flight. So after this meeting, I'm going to be exhausted. Why? Because I'm anxious right now. On a scale of 1 to 10, I'm probably at like a 6 or a 7, which to some people may not seem like a big deal. And I will be honest, it's easier doing it over Zoom than in person, because if I'm in person, then I got to know where the nearest hospital is, fire station, urgent care, whatever. But when I'm done with this meeting, I will be very, very tired because my body has had all that adrenaline pumping through it. So the first time it worked, and I will just tell you one little story and then I'll leave you. I was getting my haircut, and in the middle of a haircut, right, you're like, okay, well, what's the big deal? Well, what if I get a haircut and in the middle of it, I start panicking and I have to leave? So when I went to get the haircut, the lady cutting my hair was like, hey, are you okay? And I go, I have a little bit of a stomach ache today. I'm not feeling good, which is really my way, because of shame and stigma and all that, of saying, I'm actually really anxious and I have panic attacks, but I don't want to tell you that because I'm afraid of how you're going to think of me after that. So I just said, yeah, I'm not feeling very good. So I was getting the haircut, and about 10 minutes into it, And I mean, on a scale of 1 to 10, I was at about a 13 or a 14. I was pretty convinced I was dying, but I just had faith and I just said, I just have to suck it up. And it was not fun. It was probably one of the worst experiences of my life. And all of a sudden, like a ghost, it disappeared. And when I say disappeared, like it had never happened. And so in that moment, and this was weeks after I had my exposure response prevention therapy, I called my wife. I cried my eyes out for a good 5 to 7 minutes or however long it was. And then I remember telling her I felt so powerful because I beat it in that moment. I wanted to lift the entire strip mall off the ground and throw it across the street. Like I just felt amazing. Now, you would think, okay, well, you did it and then you showed the doubt bully you don't have to freak out and run to the hospital, so it would be easier. No, it's not that way. It's constant. So everything that happens in my life, the doubt bully is over here going, hey, what if you freak out? And over here, I'm literally figuratively giving the middle finger to my doubt bully. And I'm saying no. So now when people say, hey, do you want to do this? And my doubt bully goes, no, he doesn't want to go. I'm like, oh, yeah, sure, I'd love to go. Because if I don't, then it makes it harder the next time. So the last thing I will leave you with, and again, I'm very resilient. I work really, really hard to manage my anxiety, but it is an ongoing process. So the one thing I would say, if everybody on this Zoom call right now could not communicate verbally, because we speak a different language, we've grown up in different countries, we've had different upbringings, different experiences, different behaviors modeled for us. But I walk into the room with a box full of puppies, and I mean the most adorable puppies you've ever seen. What noise will everybody in the room make when they see the puppies? They're going to go, oh, I mean, I'm going to melt. I will just turn into a pile of mush. Well, that feeling you get when you see that box of puppies, that is who we are at our core. That is how God designed us, in my opinion. And what that really represents is love. So I would just encourage everybody, if somebody's brave enough to share with you that they are struggling, depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, whatever their mental illness struggle is, or any struggle for that matter, see if you can find a way to be that person that we were intended to be, which is one big ball of love, and be patient and kind and see what you can do to help that person. So that's my story.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Bill. I really appreciate you hopping on. Bill is hopping off because he's got another meeting, but I'm happy to relay any questions at the end. All right. All right. Thank you so much. We are going to go to our second to last speaker, Keisha, and then we'll hear from Lydia and then open it up for questions.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Keisha Harris. I'm the mother of three, and I've lived with anxiety and depression for over 15 years. My intention today is just to give you a glimpse into the denial that I carried in not wanting to accept my mental health condition, share what anxiety and depression looks like for me, and how acceptance transformed my mental health as well as self-care. There are stories we carry in our bodies long before we can speak them aloud. This is one of mine. There was a time when I was praised for how much I could hold inside of me, unspoken, but no one ever asked what it cost me. I called it being tired. I called it being busy. I called it going through a rough patch. But what I couldn't name was this: I was in denial. Denial of the fog that hung over me, and I could feel it in my neck. The denial of the chest tightening anxiety I called just being on top of things. Denial of a sadness so thick it lived in my lower back. No one ever told me I could name it, so I learned to hide it. Until one day, I didn't want to hide anymore. I wanted to remember what it felt like to just breathe again. And the garden is where my breath came back. It was nothing sacred about it, a corner lot behind some new constructions and next to some really old buildings, overgrown and empty for the most part. The kind of place where people pass by without ever seeing it. But that summer day, I stood at the gate like it was holy ground because for once I wasn't trying to be useful. I wasn't trying to be strong, and I had nothing left to perform. I just needed a place where silence wouldn't feel like punishment. And then that's when she came. She stepped into view like a memory, not slowly, but suddenly. A little girl, about 8 or 9, cute little ponytails, eyes carrying way too much. Her hands were clenched and her arms were crossed. She didn't speak, she didn't even smile, but I knew her. She was the girl who grew up in a home where emotions made people uncomfortable. She was the girl who was told to stop crying before the neighbors heard. The girl who learned to shrink, how to disappear, and how to ache quietly. She was the younger me. And she had found her way back to me in the garden. We didn't talk, we just worked in silence. She cleared weeds like she had something to prove. And I turned the soil like I was searching for pieces of myself. And in that quiet, something started to shift. Unspoken, didn't need any explanations, just receiving. And I felt like I was received too. At one point, she paused, looked at the ground, and was like, why do they call dirt dirty if it makes things grow? Something in that broke inside of me because I had been taught to fear the dirt, the messy parts of me, the grief that lingered, the panic that came in waves, and the depression that dulled things that I loved and enjoyed. I spent my whole life trying to be clean, composed, and worthy. But maybe the healing wasn't about staying clean. It was about letting the work and the dirt work on me. The garden became my sweet spot, not because I was healed, but because I finally stopped lying to myself that I was hurt. I let the soil hold what my family couldn't. I let the sun see what I had hidden. I let my younger self stay without trying to fix her, without trying to silence her or send her away. We just tended the earth. And in doing so, we started tending to ourselves. I no longer needed to be the woman who had it all together. I just needed to be the woman who came back for the little girl who didn't fall apart. To anyone who was taught to survive by denial, who was never given the language to name their sadness, who calls anxiety just being responsible or depression just being tired, I want to say this. You're not broken. You're not weak. You are sacred soil. And what you feel does not make you unworthy. It makes you human. I learned that I didn't need to hide my diagnosis or deny how I was feeling. I needed a shovel and I needed space. And I needed the silence that didn't shame me. What we need, I believe, is a garden, a place where grief can breathe, where anxiety doesn't have to be explained, and where the younger you can finally rest and say, I'm tired, and someone to allow you to rest. Because when the garden grows, it doesn't just grow food, it grows the pieces and parts of us that we thought we lost. I've dedicated my working life to advocating for and educating communities about mental health and building spaces for healing as an alternative to therapy. I am part of a peer-led nonprofit community-based organization where we have this amazing wellness program. It's a garden initiative where it merges mental health with gardening as self-care. I also sit on the Sacramento County Mental Health Board and the First Five Advisory Committee, where I uplift the needs of mental health for marginalized communities. In closing, I want to let you know that feeling anxious and being overwhelmed or stressed out shouldn't just be a normal part of life and not talking about it. So I want to ask you a favor. I want you to be selfish, extremely selfish when it comes to taking care of your mental health. Thank you so much for allowing me to share.
All right, thank you so much, Keisha. All right, so we've heard from three of our awesome speakers, and now I'm going to pass it off to our last speaker, Lydia, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Hi, thanks for inviting me. My name is Lydia. First, I want to start off with a couple questions. Do you or someone you love have a reality that doesn't quite match what others are? Do you often feel like you're walking a tightrope? One side of you is looming a psychosis, and the other is a major, deep, dark depression. But I really do want to start off at the beginning of my journey with schizoaffective disorder. So, first off, I've always had a slightly different form of reality than others. But what happened to me was I had undiagnosed major depression, and in my late 20s, I tried to commit suicide. I ended up on life support, and I did die 2 different times that night. Obviously, I survived, but that was the trigger for my psychosis. Shortly after what was my first hospitalization, I started seeing and hearing things that others didn't. My hallucinations and my delusions started out very subtly. I was hearing things my husband would say that he really hadn't said. Then I heard voices when nobody else was around, and I was feeling like everyone was after me and actually wanting me dead. I was seeing monsters around me everywhere. And I also felt like bugs were crawling all over my skin. I've also been hospitalized multiple times, but what had led to my last hospitalization was the scariest, not only for my family, but for myself. My reality was so altered that I was walking down the highway while I didn't realize it was a highway. With schizoaffective disorder, it is extremely hard because I'm not only fighting my psychosis, I'm fighting my depression. I can go through periods where just getting out of bed is an accomplishment worth celebrating, and with no reason that I can give, there will be an onset. I'll find myself smiling to everyone, and on the inside, I feel myself crying and screaming. I find myself wearing a mask. Sometimes when my depression is really dark, it can cause the onset of my psychosis. And so managing my depression is just as important as managing the rest of my mental health struggles because they are all tied together. With my medications, along with my husband, my coping skills, and my support team, I can function as well as anyone else. It also helps to hear others' stories along with sharing my own because it is very healing. It can connect you to others so you know that it's not just you. But now that you've heard of some of what I've been through, now let me tell you some of what I can do. I've helped raise our wonderful son, helped teach Sunday school regularly, ran multiple church events, continually and fully participate in a National Ladies Society for the past 12 plus years. I've homeschooled our son from kindergarten through to his high school graduation. And currently I homeschool 2 of my granddaughters, both of them from kindergarten to one now being in high school and the other in middle school. Finally, I am in control of my own mental health. But what does being in control really mean? Well, it doesn't mean that I don't have psychosis anymore because I still do. And even now on medications, I still hear whispers and I still see 2 figures that are always with me. I call them my buddies. During the onset of a psychosis, I still feel like bugs are crawling on me and I itch. And I can actually scratch the skin off my own arms. My psychosis affects me not only mentally, but physically also. So being on this journey, I've learned some of my triggers and how to avoid them. I have learned some coping skills to help me find my reality when I'm stressed or anxious. My husband, who has always been through this very beginning of my mental health journey, also helps me avoid triggers he has noticed that I've not. He also helps to monitor my medication. The trick for me was to surround myself with my support team or group, finding the right doctors, which was extremely tricky, finding the right medication or medication combos, which made me feel like a giant guinea pig, and the right therapy, because if you research it, there are many. It took trying one thing after another to come up with what actually works for me. But what works for me may not work for anybody else. It really took a lot of trial and error. But addressing your mental health can be the bravest thing you do. There's no sudden or quick fix. It takes time. It takes patience. Not only does it take our patience, but the patience of those that love us. It can be difficult. It can be scary, but you just always got to remind yourself to go just that one more day, because it may only take just that one more day to get you through it. There are also many misconceptions and myths about schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder. And I'd like to share one of the many misconceptions, and that's that people with this disorder have that we're dangerous. But in reality, we're more likely to hurt ourselves than to hurt you. Not to say anyone isn't dangerous, because let's face it, humans in general are. But because the stigma, I'm still afraid to let people know of my mental health diagnosis. There are many disorders that have similar symptoms. So if you find someone telling you something is not quite right, please try and listen. You may be acting, saying, or hearing something that is different than what you may be realizing. I didn't realize my reality was the wrong one. The trick is fighting for those you love as well as fighting for yourself. So I still find myself keeping friends and family at arm's length, and that's because I don't like to be noticed or judged too closely. And that is something I am still working on. Mental health is a battle worth fighting for. And I find helping others is also helping myself. I hope my story will help someone else struggling or someone you know who is struggling. And thank you for listening to my journey so far.
All right, thank you so much, Lydia. I'm going to go ahead and remove your pin. And now we're going to open it up for some questions. The first question we received was for Keisha. What is the community gardening organization you work with?
Absolutely. The community organization is called July Forward. There's also a website, julyforward.org. And again, just merging mental health with gardening is self-care. Absolutely amazing. And you all are welcome.
All right, perfect. Yep. And then just a second on the sharing more information on the gardening organization. I put the website in the chat. I think that's it for questions so far. So now feel free to either ask questions in the chat or unmute and ask our speakers over the audio. Any questions at all?
I don't have a question per se, but I did want to make a comment that I really appreciate you guys coming out and speaking to us. I was watching Trey specifically because your camera's on, and I saw that Kim's story really touched you. And I can really speak to experience that my husband suffers from borderline personality disorder and major depressive disorder. And so while I have not experienced it personally, I can certainly say that as a family member and a loved one, watching somebody go through these struggles is also difficult. And hearing folks talk about their own experiences, I think, is also helpful for those of us who are there to support our friends and family members and loved ones who are also struggling. And it helps us understand that we're not alone as we're going through this process together. So I really appreciate you guys for coming forward and talking about this and sharing with our group here, because the Mental Health Awareness Month is a big deal for CDFA, and we're really trying to make it a big focal point for our DAC. Also interesting to hear you're part of the DAC at your organization, Kim. So really great to have another DAC member here. So that's great.
And thank you so much for sharing that. That's part of the stigma reduction, in action, is being able to share, yes, I have either personal experience with this, or I, know someone who is dealing with this. That is stigma in action. A little while ago, no one would have ever said that on a call with, coworkers or strangers, et cetera. So I think that just goes to show, little by little, I think the tide is changing. We're just trying to continue to steer it in a positive direction. Oh, you're unmuted, but I think the microphone's up.
There you go. Can you hear me?
There we go. Yep.
There we go. I just wanted to say thank you. And yeah, Justin, I was touched by all the stories, but yeah, that first one just really got me. I even at the end I took a second because I was started crying. I'm like, oh my goodness, like it was just really touching, every single story, and the vulnerability. You know, I it's just touching, and I totally get it, and I just thank you guys. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having us. And thank you to our wonderful speakers. It's not really easy to talk about stuff like this sometimes on a Tuesday afternoon, but all of our speakers handle it with such grace. And I've found that the speakers are able to share as much or as little as they want about their stories, but sometimes there's a lot of power in sharing kind of the nitty-gritty details and letting it, lose a little bit of power. And we've got some thanks. Is the garden organization in Sacramento, or there are multiple gardens, any in Midtown? And then thank you so much for sharing your stories. All very touching indeed. Thank you so much. All right. Well, if there's no other questions, I'll give you 10 minutes back to enjoy a little bit of lunch before diving into the afternoon. Thank you so much for having us, and have a wonderful rest of your May is Mental Health Awareness Month.
Thanks, everybody. Have
Thank
a
you.
good rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.